Hey, Lulu.
Hey.
What is Dracula's favourite coffee order?
I have no idea.
Decaffeinated.
Fuck off. It's been a long time.
Have you missed them?
Oh, yeah.
Hello and welcome to the Highly Strange podcast. You are here with Sarah and Lewis.
All right.
What?
All right.
I want to start this episode with a question. And it's a question for you and a question for Liam. So we'll start with you, Lulu.
Go on then.
What is the thing or story that traumatised you the most as a child? Like, what was your biggest irrational fear?
See, mine was Toy Story.
Right.
Because I was obsessed with the idea that if I didn't have my feet tucked into my duvet at the end of the bed, my toys would come to life and they'd grab me. But my dad would, enable this. And he'd come into my room at night and he'd, take my, huge Buzz Lightyear toy and he'd hang it on my, lampshades. So I'd wake up and, my Buzz Lightyear was hanging off my light and I was terrified. And I said to my dad, more recently, in the recent years, I said, that really, traumatised me. He goes, yeah, it was funny.
So how did you feel about this film Toy Soldiers?
Oh, yeah, I've never watched it.
Oh, God, maybe don't if Toy Story was enough. Toy Soldiers is next level for that. Liam, what's yours?
Mine was Alien Invasions, funny enough.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think... I can't remember where I saw it. It might have been because my friend had this badass Transformers cartoon, and it was like the movie, and they waged this giant war on an alien planet. So I think it's because of that, because I remember there being a mothership in it. But I was terrified. I have a really vivid memory of hiding, underneath the window, crouching down under the window, because I was afraid that there was a spaceship out there.
Or the film Signs, where you look up and then it's just an alien that walks past the window. Oh, that bit made me feel physically sick when I was younger for some reason.
I hated Signs because the house I grew up in had a cornfield directly behind it.
When you grew up in the Midwest of America, I remember.
somewhere local like that. So my biggest rational fear was Mr. Blobby.
Yeah, well, that's not irrational.
Couldn't stand Mr. Blobby. And, if he came on the telly, I needed it to be turned off and was really scared.
Our American listeners will have no idea who Mr. Blobby is, I would
What's
imagine.
the guy's name? I can't remember.
Noel Edmonds.
Noel Edmonds, yeah.
They won't know who Noel Edmonds is either. What is Mr. Blobby?
I'll post a picture of Mr. Blobby.
Yeah.
But he was a man in a suit that didn't say words. It was like... kind of like a turkey. And he had, what you would give little kids to make pictures of the stick-on googly eyes, but massive ones. And he was bright pink with yellow spots. Yeah. And he freaked the fuck out of me.
But he would just cause chaos. He'd just run into a room and just, jump onto tables and just knock everything flying.
He was, personality-wise, like the Grinch.
Yeah.
You expect the Grinch to turn up to your house and turn everything upside down. So he was similar to that. But he freaked me out so bad.
Mr. Blobby.
I hated it. But because I went to a party when I was little and I didn't realise it was somebody's dad that was dressed as Mr. Blobby and he grabbed my mum. And I was like, Mr. Blobby's taking my mum! And I ran out of the party and was, terrified because I just thought he was, abducting my mother.
Rightly so, to be fair. We'd do an episode of Mr. Blobby.
But, and like I say, it was...
Did he make the noises as well?
No, he probably said, hello, Debs. But I didn't like it.
I like to imagine that Mr. Blobby is the voice of the banker on Deal or No Deal.
Yeah. He's like, 40,000! It sounds more like Boris.
That's when you make a deal because you're just terrified of what Mr. Blobby is going to do if you say no deal.
Over and done with.
Even more scary is you just hear Blobby, 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 and then Noel Edmonds cracks up. That's the scary bit.
Just take the fucking box.
Well. For the children of Gorbals, a small town in the city of Glasgow in Scotland, a joint fear of vampires was sweeping across the schoolyards and playgrounds. So, to start the episode, I'm going to give you a little bit of brief lore about vampires. Do you know much on vampire lore? I think we all know the obvious, don't look in the mirror, garlic will get rid of them, they don't like the cross.
You shine in the sunlight.
Yeah.
Like diamonds.
And they don't age, because if anybody got the reference for What's Next Wednesday, Paul Rudd does not age either.
Absolutely the worst teaser I've ever seen.
It was difficult to think of one. He is nearly 54 years old and he looks the same as he did when he was 25.
I was on my...
So I'm telling you now, He sucks blood.
I was on my deathbed with the worst cold in the world, which is why I weren't here last week. And I looked at it, and Sarah was like, look at this, I'm going to do my teaser. And I looked at it, I was like, what the fuck? It's Paul Rudd's like Ant-Man with a cloak.
The cape was the only one I could find that didn't look directly like a superhero one. And I think of capes when I think of vampires.
I think of Edward Cullen.
I didn't want to do like I don't know.
Pretty vampires.
That's the thing, I didn't want to get like Twilight.
Could have made Paul Rudd sparkly.
I could have, but I didn't. And I hope maybe someone got it.
Yeah, you should have just posted a picture of him playing baseball, because that's what all vampires do, don't they?
Do they?
Just play. Have you not seen Twilight?
No.
Oh, I've just outed
I don't
myself.
want to.
Let's continue the episode.
You're quite a big fan.
Let's continue the episode. Tell your story.
Okay. In popular legend, a vampire is a creature, often fanged, that preys upon humans, generally by consuming their blood. Vampires have been featured in folklore and fiction of various cultures for hundreds of years, predominantly in Europe. Creatures with vampiric characteristics have appeared at least as far back as ancient Greece, where stories were told of creatures that attacked people in their sleep and drained their bodily fluids. Tales of walking corpses that drank the blood of the living and spread plague flourished in medieval Europe in times of disease. A person may become a vampire in a variety of ways, the most common of which is to be bitten by a vampire. Other methods include sorcery, committing suicide, contagion, or having a cat jump over a person's corpse.
No. Watch out.
Cats out the graveyards. Some people believe that babies born with teeth or on Christmas were predisposed to becoming vampires. While vampires usually do not die of disease or other normal human affiliations, and they are indeed often said to have faster than normal healing capabilities, there are various methods for their destruction. The most popular of those include a wooden stake through the heart, fire, decapitation, and exposure to sunlight. Vampires are often depicted as being repelled by garlic, running water, or Christian implements such as crucifixes and holy water. In some stories, vampires may enter a home only if they've been invited. And in others, they may be distracted by the scattering of objects such as seeds or grains that they are compelled to count, thereby enabling potential victims to escape. Which I can't remember what we spoke about before. It was the killer cantrezoi. You could give them a colander, couldn't you? And if they counted the holes, that would stop them coming in. So it's similar to that, which is funny because obviously that was a Greek tale, and they're saying sometimes the vampires originated in ancient Greece as well.
So
which I thought was quite cool.
It's like babies born on Christmas.
Yeah, that was...
become vampires.
I can't remember what country that was in, but a lot of people believe that they'd be like werewolves if they're male and witches if they're girls, if they're born on Christmas Day.
That's a double curse, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't want to be born on Christmas because then you don't get any presents through the year.
So, I'm going to give you... I think it's quite a fun story.
Okay. You say it's set in Glasgow.
It is.
Am I going to be hearing a Scottish accent?
No, I can't do a Scottish accent. I can say one sentence in a Scottish accent, which my friend Megan taught me.
Go on then.
Which is, I took me wee little doggy to the shop and bought him a bun. But that is all I can say. It's quite good.
Well, see if you can put that in the episode.
Can you do
somewhere.
one?
No.
You've
heard my
accent.
accent.
Literally that one line.
Do you not remember my Utah rancher voice?
I thought you were just trying to be an alien.
Oh yeah, my alien voice is quite good.
The history of Gorbals has an unfortunate stigma to it being a place made for slums. However, Gorbals in earlier years had been a small village centred entirely around just one street. At this time, some parts of the Gorbals became a very desirable place to live, having the reputation of a quaint, nice place to set up a family home. The village was designed in 1872. It was a diamond shape and completely centred around a fountain. The Gorbals was created with the intention of only housing a small community. This area covered just 2% of Glasgow, but by 1931, 85,000 people lived there. This was a huge number for the small part of land, and the Gorbals began to feel overstretched and overcapacitated. To picture Glasgow in the 1950s, this was time affected by industry and community rebuilding and recovering from the horror of war. The building still remained covered in soot and thick black smog that at times almost completely blocked out the natural light. The backlash of the war had created a huge housing crisis and a baby boom was in process. This led to houses being built as quickly and as cheaply as possible. Nobody had gardens and the area as a whole completely lacked any greenery. This dark and depressing area almost gives off the perfect vibe and aesthetic for a horror story. Life was hard, the streets became a violent place to be, and poverty ran rife through the town. In spite of this, the Gorbals had a different side to it. It had become famous for its community spirit that almost became stronger every time another blow hit the town. Children played on the streets, kicking footballs, knocking doorbells and running away. They even began hunting vampires.
Your description of Glasgow in the 50s, it could be now.
Yeah. I was thinking that as well, when it's like they got houses up cheaply and quickly as possible. I'm like, yeah, so do most housing estates these days.
We've actually got listeners in Glasgow, so I mean, we're not anymore.
The Gorbals had one open, green, lush and beautiful space. It was Glasgow's oldest and largest graveyard, the Southern Necropolis. The graveyard was often described as picturesque, and it spread across several acres. The cemetery is on Caledonia Road. At the time, many of the cemeteries were at full capacity in the area, so the Southern Necropolis provided a much-needed resting space for bodies. In contrast to the busy, bustling area, the graveyard was known as a place of peace, a space to go and respectfully remember loved ones. The entrance had a huge Gothic gatehouse, one to be appreciated for its beauty, but also to be wary of for the creepiness of some of the statues. Try to remember that this graveyard provided the green area within the town. This graveyard, for the children living in the Gorbals, became a playground, a space to escape, so that they had fields that they couldn't find anywhere else. Stories began to emerge in the Gorbals. These stories surrounded missing children that had met a gruesome and forceful death in the graveyard. Like all stories that children hear and embellish, the children needed to add a monster to these tales, something to scare each other with, but also to air a caution that it could happen and could be true. The monster of these missing children quickly became a 7-foot-tall vampire. The amazingly tall vampire was described as having iron teeth, which they used to kill and eat children with. The story began to spread and was given a source of truth to it. All the children in the village began to claim they knew someone or had heard of someone that had become victim to the Gorbal vampire. The children would quickly take this tale to be fact. The adults in Gorbal didn't believe the children. They tried to hush the stories and calm the children with claims of vampires not being real and reassuring the children they had nothing to worry about. This, however, didn't reassure the children of Gorbal and instead led them to believe that they needed to take it upon themselves to end the vampire plaguing their town. They were the primary victims after all. Secretly, the children passed messages to one another of tales and names of children that had been taken. They began to arrange meetups to discuss what to do with the problem that they were facing. They even made weapons and created an elaborate plot to attack. The day of this attack came, and in 1954, hundreds of young children from Gorbal swarmed the graveyard. They had one very clear goal: hunt and destroy the Gorbal vampire. The children armed themselves with sharp sticks and dogs before descending onto the graveyard. They hunted for hours and hours, and over the space of 2 days, more children joined the vampire catcher quest.
Could you imagine just seeing this? Just
Crazy.
like walking your dog and there's like 200 kids in a graveyard with sharpened sticks.
In an attempt to stop the children, the police were called. This came to no avail though, as the children were stubborn and driven to find what they came for. A policeman would not be enough to persuade the children to leave. The school's head teacher arrived though, however, and after a long time pleading with the children, the crowds began to disperse. Tam Smith, a 7-year-old local schoolboy, recalled the scene in a newspaper interview several years later. The walls were lined with people. We ventured through the gatehouse and there were loads of kids in there, some wandering around and some sitting on the walls. There were a lot of dogs too, and mums and dads with kids. We found a place to stand out of the way because there were so many people there. I think the whole of Gorbals was in that graveyard. It's hard to put an estimate on the number of people. Ronnie Sanderson, another child who was 8 years old at the time, said, "It all started in the playground. The word was there was a vampire and everyone was going to head out to the graveyard after school. At 3 o'clock, the school emptied and everyone made a beeline for it. We sat there for ages on the wall, waiting and waiting. I wouldn't go into the graveyard fully as it was a bit scary for me. I think somebody saw someone wandering around and the cry went up, 'There's the vampire!' And that was it. That was the word to get off that wall quick and either way get away from it or hunt it. I just remember scampering home to my mother. 'What's the matter with you?' she said. 'Mum, I've just seen a vampire.' I quickly got a clout round the ear for my trouble. I didn't even really know what a vampire was. A few days later, after the stakeout, the children of Gorbals were lectured on the myths surrounding vampires. The story of the missing children had been unfounded. Historians local to the area believe the children were driven to conjure up this story by the folk legend of Jenny with the iron teeth, who was known to be a murderous ghost who would haunt Glasgow Green. as well as Jenny, a popular American comic named The Vampire with the Iron Teeth. Others even say the children had been terrified by a Bible passage, Daniel 7:7. Behold, a fourth beast, dreadful, terrible, and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. The local Scottish press ran several stories on the Gorbal vampires, and eventually it gained worldwide coverage. A very bizarre joining of Christians, communists, and a National Union teachers blamed the mass hysteria on American comic books. This led to even more panic, and before long, a campaign was started to ban these comics. The campaign even reached Parliament. It was championed by a Labour MP for the Gorbals area. This concluded in the 1955 Children's and Young People's Harmful Publications Act being passed. This act is still in use, rightly or wrongly, today. That's my story.
So that's like partly the reason why we have like age ratings and stuff.
Yeah, because they just all apparently read this comic and ran with it. And the story is like the same. The vampire in that comic does eat children. It's got iron teeth.
It's a bad time to be a tall man in Gorbal.
Yeah.
If you're 7 foot, if you're Peter Crouch on a visit to Gorbal, you're like fleeing. You're going to get shanked by 200 kids.
I think it's mental. And some of the like police officers at the time were like, we just got this call and we were told like there's about 250 kids in a graveyard. And apparently the police officer was like, oh, this is a joke. Like, we're going to get down there. There's going to be like 5 teenagers in a graveyard. And obviously they got there and were like, the fuck is this? And they were just faced with 250 children outright refusing to leave until they'd killed this vampire.
Pumped up on iron brew.
Yeah.
And haggis and whatever other stereotypes we can think of.
It's crazy though. I like it. I like it a lot. So the hunt in total lasted for 3 days. They were in that graveyard for 3 days.
How big was the graveyard?
I don't know. I couldn't find like exact things, but it is like the biggest. It's meant to be the biggest graveyard in Glasgow.
200 kids surely could cover a graveyard in less than 3 days.
Yeah, no, it wasn't that they needed to cover the whole graveyard. They were just like, parents were pleading for them to go home and they were like, no, not until we found the vampire. So their hunt continued for 3 days.
It was an ambush.
Yeah. And they made weapons. They were like ready. I love that their spirit is like, look, the parents aren't listening. They're not taking us seriously. We now need to commit murder.
It's a bit like Stranger Things.
Yeah, it is actually.
Like the 4 kids against like the government.
Yeah, it's really similar. I love it though. I love the story. And just imagining like 1950s kids, like, come on.
Good time for an ice cream man to
yeah.
just park their van outside the graveyard, rubbing his hands together.
I was trying to think of like other like mass hysteria cases, but the only other one I can think of is the Hat Man, which we'll cover.
Or the Mad Gasser.
Oh yeah,
and that village where everyone was dancing.
What's that?
Oh, I can't remember the exact details. Maybe we'll do it. There was just a village where everyone was dancing to the point where they were like falling down dead.
Oh, weird.
They were like obsessed that you saw someone dance and then you have to start dancing. Oh. The Mad Gas is a good one.
Yeah, we could cover that as well.
What else? There was another one. I think the dancing one might have been because there was some fungus in this bread they were eating and it made them go mad. This entire village was eating this like poisoned bread that was making them all dance.
But it came from the church. That was the body of Christ. But so that is the story of the Gorbals vampire. I have another vampire story for you.
Double
if you
feature.
would like to hear it. It's a bit longer.
Go on then.
Ready?
I'll make myself comfortable.
The wheat thing, the fungus that makes people hallucinate and dance is called ergot.
Ergot
poisoning.
Ah.
So some people think was the cause of the Salem witch trials.
Oh, okay. So we're going to leave Scotland.
Where are we going now?
We're going to London.
Oh, lovely.
Have you ever heard of Highgate Cemetery? Or seen pictures of it? It's quite a infamous cemetery.
Yeah, I think I have, yeah.
Cool, yeah. It's why I'd like to go. Never been, but I'd like to go. I think some of it's even like underground and stuff. So I think they have like crypts and...
That's the difference between you and me. You want to go and like visit a cemetery. I want to go on like a nice beach somewhere. And like go to Greece and have like a nice holiday, and you want to go to like a fucking graveyard.
I don't understand why you don't.
Well, why don't we just find a graveyard next to a beach and we can sort of meet in the middle?
Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Deal.
Go to the beach in my speedos. Not the beach, the cemetery.
No deal. I'm back to Noel Edmonds. No deal. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, a series of bizarre events occurred in and around Highgate Cemetery in London. A number of sightings of phantoms and spectres, particularly of a tall, dark, cloaked entity with burning eyes. This led to speculation that the capital had acquired its very own vampire. Reports soon came from Highgate of tombs being broken into, graves and bodies were desecrated, and black magic rituals allegedly performed. Vampire hunters claimed to have broken open coffins and plunged stakes into and even burnt the corpses of the undead. A little bit disrespectful.
This was a bad time to be tall, because I imagine back then people were naturally shorter, weren't you?
Yeah.
It's like lack of nutrition.
And it's probably all it took, isn't it? You just got to stand out a little bit from the crowd.
If you're unnaturally tall for the time, everyone's like, Jesus Christ, murder him, he's a witch. He's a vampire.
He's Stephen Merchant. Newspapers obsessed over the strange occurrences. TV programmes were made about a supposed nest of vampires in Highgate Cemetery, and those promising to root out this ancient evil were interviewed. On Friday the 13th of March, always a Friday the 13th, 1970, hundreds of would-be vampire hunters invaded the Victorian graveyard and engaged in a search for what was becoming known as the Highgate vampire. But did any sort of vampire actually exist? Who were these self-proclaimed vampire hunters? Some of whom would dedicate years to trying to understand the phenomenon and to hunting the vampire down. How could a late 20th century city be gripped by a panic more at home in the pages of a Victorian Gothic novel? Highgate Cemetery was a far more ramshackle place than it is now. Once one of London's most fashionable burial grounds. That's such a weird sentence, isn't it? Like, I want to be buried in the fashionable one, please. The graveyard was by the 1960s overgrown and neglected. Graffiti was scrawled across headstones. Vandals had pulled doors off of vaults. Cracks and holes in tombs offered glimpses of coffins and, in some cases, bodies. Ooh. That's why I want to go.
Fucking what?
I won't steal it.
Oh, God.
Take a quick picture for Insta.
At Highly Strange Pod.
Yeah. That is not a promise. It's not surprising that the dilapidated grandeur of this cemetery, with its ivy-entwined Gothic monuments, would generate legends of hauntings and sinister creatures, and draw those with an interest in the occult and macabre. According to David Farron, a young local man with a passion for the paranormal, the first murmurings about a strange being began in late 1969. Farron claimed that he spoke to two people, an old lady who'd been out walking her dog and a middle-aged accountant, who told similar stories about what they'd seen in the cemetery. The old lady had been walking down Swains Lane, a road running through the graveyard, when she saw a tall, dark figure with glaring eyes that seemed to be floating towards her. She felt the air turn icy cold. The accountant had got lost in the vast cemetery. A bell started to clang, and he walked towards the sound, hoping it might guide him out of the necropolis. Instead, as the bell tolled, he became aware of something behind him and noticed the temperature plummeting. He turned around to see a tall, dark figure that stared at him intensely before it vanished. If I had a bell in a graveyard, I'd leave. No. Because that's the expression, isn't it? Saved by the Bell.
No, it's a TV programme.
No, but do you know, like, the history of the expression?
That's not Will Smith, is it? Saved by the Bell?
No.
No, Will Smith is Fresh Prince.
That's the one.
But do you know why you say Saved by the Bell?
No.
It's because, like before, to make sure that people were properly dead, they had a bell tied to their toe. So that if they were still alive in their coffin, if they wiggled their toe, you'd hear the bell ring. And then that meant you had to dig them up.
At that time, they also used to put, like, glass boxes over the face so you could...
The worst one is they'd put, like a really long straw that popped out the top, and you had to sniff it to make sure you could smell decomposing. Because if you couldn't, they had to be.
You don't want to suck. You don't want to suck on that straw.
Can you imagine?
Yeah, you get some nice, like
smoothie,
nice little juice.
Decomposing. Right, fermented smoothie.
No,
basically.
Not those horrible green drinks people have.
This is old lady kale.
Oh. Really got him hankering for old lady kale.
Put it back. Right. Intrigued, Farron decided to investigate by spending a night in the graveyard. Farron said, "At first I suspected it might just be an animal or someone dressed up just messing about because all these stories about vampires were in the news. But around midnight, I caught sight of a figure, about 7 feet tall, that appeared to be floating just above the ground. I saw its face and 2 points of intense red light. The area turned icy cold, as if I'd stepped into a refrigerator. The figure seemed to be draining me of energy, and it felt like I was losing control of my normal faculties. It felt like a vivid dream, like I wanted to wake up, but I just couldn't. Realising I was under intense psychic attack, I repeated mentally a Kabbalistic incantation used to repel evil forces. It disappeared, but I decided the reports were true. Just like that.
You just decide.
Yeah, that's it, they're true.
Yeah, that's true. I lost my faculties in the graveyard.
Yeah. I tried the kale smoothie.
Lost my faculties, and it's true.
Oh dear. In February 1970, Farrant wrote a letter to a local newspaper, the Hampstead and Highgate Express, also known as High and Ham. Just thought that was quite funny. Asking if anyone had seen anything similar.
Sounds like a good evening.
High and Ham.
High and
Ham. A number of people responded, saying they had glimpsed apparitions in Highgate Cemetery and on Swains Lane. These phantoms, though, were a variety of descriptions, including a tall man wearing a hat, a ghostly cyclist, a lady dressed in white, a face grimacing through the bars of a gate, a person wading into a pond, and a pale gliding entity. There were also reports of the sounds of bells and voices calling. There was little coherence in the type of spectres people claimed to have seen. Another local young man with an interest in the supernatural, Sean Manchester, was intrigued by what he read, and Manchester would soon make public his ideas about what the apparition in the graveyard might be.
Do you think that because all the different apparitions are so different, that lends credence to the stories or not? Like, if they were all the same thing, you'd be like, maybe that could be true, but then maybe everyone's parroting the stories that are famous there.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because you can obviously look at both either way. Because sometimes if everybody sees the same thing, it makes you believe it more. Because it's like, well, they've all had this collected vision and... that maybe that does mean it is true, because that's kind of how the Hat Man works, isn't it? Everybody's seen the same apparition. But yeah, I also agree that sometimes it's like, well, then you just heard someone tell the story and then you saw it yourself, so that ideology was already there, like planted in your mind, wasn't it?
Also, fuck ghost cyclists.
Ghost cyclists.
I hate cyclists. Fuck ghost cyclists.
Well, they've got a big win in the highway code now, haven't they? They're like allowed to like drive in the middle of the road.
What, ghost cyclists?
Yeah.
There's a fucking chapter in the highway code for ghost cyclists now.
It's next to pirates, ghost pirates.
I tell you, this government's got out of control.
What, is that the nail in the coffin for you?
Yeah, that's it.
Though Farrant had never claimed the dark figure he'd encountered was a vampire, Sean Manchester had little to no doubt that a genuine vampire was stalking suburban North London. Manchester contacted the Ham and High, and on the 27th of February 1970, the newspaper published an interview entitled "Does a Vampire Walk in Highgate?", in which Manchester outlined a theory to explain the monster's presence. Manchester alleged that a king of vampire of the undead was buried in the graveyard. The vampire, who in life had been an aristocrat and practitioner of black magic in medieval Romania, had been transported to England in a coffin by his followers in the early 18th century. The vampire had been interred on the site that would later become Highgate Cemetery, and his followers had also purchased a house for him in London's fashionable West End. The reason for the Highgate vampire's reappearance, Manchester said, was that rituals recently carried out by Satanists in the cemetery had reawakened his evil presence. Manchester claimed to have spoken to local people who'd experienced vampiric activity. A schoolgirl, Elizabeth, had seen the vampire when walking down Swains Lane. She began having nightmares in which something evil tried to come into her bedroom. Eventually, 2 wounds appeared on her neck, and she started to display symptoms of anemia. Manchester, Elizabeth's boyfriend, filled her room with garlic, crucifixes and holy water, and apparently her condition soon improved.
Oh, good.
Yeah. It's nice to get a happy ending. Yeah. Manchester spoke to another young woman called Jacqueline, who said she'd woken in the night to find something cold clutching her hand. The next morning, she noticed deep tears in the flesh where she tried to force her hands free. Jacqueline and her younger brother soon developed a fascination that kept drawing them to the more dilapidated western side of Highgate Cemetery, where Manchester suspected the vampire infection had occurred. Manchester claimed that after details about the Highgate vampire became public, more people contacted him, all describing a similar tall, dark being with blazing eyes. In his interview, Manchester didn't supply any proof to back up his ideas about the vampire coming from Eastern Europe. He would later state his part of the article was a journalistic embellishment, but in a book he published in 1985, The Highgate Vampire, Manchester does mention a foreign nobleman's coffin being brought to Highgate.
So it's the foreigners.
All the infections.
Get them out. No, don't. That's a joke.
There, however, appears to be more solid evidence concerning the occult ceremonies Manchester believed were taking place in the graveyard. Farrant said that in Highgate Cemetery he'd often found the discarded remains of satanic rituals, stubs of black candles, satanic markings on the floor of the tombs, and in one small chapel-like tomb with a marble floor and stained glass windows, an inverted pentagram had been drawn on the floor. Like Manchester, Farrant felt such activities might have awoken a long dormant presence. Farrant claimed his research showed that, though the dark figure had not been glimpsed for many years before the rash of sightings in the 60s and 70s, people had seen a similar entity in the Victorian epoch.
So, that's seeing all the satanic stuff. That was before the satanic panic, wasn't it? Because that was in the 90s.
Oh, no.
Was it not?
At the start, it's around the beginning. Yeah.
I don't think it had swept the UK, though, yet. That's the thing.
It never really did in the same way.
No, I don't think it did.
As long as you've got nutty Christians, you've got that to some extent.
We've always got nutty Christians.
I think the problem is, like, whatever period of history, people are just terrified of, like, pentagrams and stuff, aren't they? They're just like, that has to be black magic and it has to be evil.
Yeah.
Wouldn't like coming to my home.
Yeah, no.
According to Manchester, the police were well aware of black magic practices going on in the cemetery. It's worth pointing out that Farrant himself was a member of a group that used the cemetery for rituals, though pagan Wicca ones rather than anything satanic. They're the same thing. Farrant stated that this group never interfered with graves or bodies, but as many of their rituals had to be conducted outdoors, they used the cemetery because it was a secluded open space. The late 1960s and early 1970s saw a revival of interest in all aspects of mysticism and the occult, including paganism, Eastern mysticism, Satanism, witchcraft, and the teachings of good old Aleister Crowley, as well as the emergence of a number of less conventional Christian sects. It's clear that an overgrown and secluded place like Highgate Cemetery could offer those engaged in the more outlandish aspects a suitable atmospheric space to carry out their ceremonies, but little concerning the Highgate vampire was likely to stay secluded for long. The Hampstead and Highgate Express continued to follow the vampire story, re-interviewing Farrant and Manchester several times over the next months. In an article published on the 6th of March 1970, Farrant said he'd found dead foxes in the cemetery, but couldn't work out how they died. Though he thought a vampire might have been responsible, Manchester claimed he'd also seen the foxes and suggested the vampire may have been using them as a food source.
You know what it could have been? Could have been the golden eagle. The car that killed every animal that went near it.
Just bloody women drivers, isn't it? Soon it was alleged the animals had been found and drained of blood with their throats ripped open.
Okay, I don't think the car did that.
No.
Just electrocuted.
Sounds quite similar to the cow mutilation, though. Yeah. So maybe we're looking at Highgate Ranch. Reports of the Highgate vampire commotion soon reached the national and even international media. Articles appeared in the national press. Television programmes were made by both ITV and the BBC, and even the International News Agency featured the cases. The anxiety around the Highgate vampire was part of a growing obsession with such creatures in British society. A number of TV programmes and horror movies had focused on vampires. One film, the Hammer horror production Taste the Blood of Dracula, released in 1970, had actually been shot in Highgate Cemetery just a year before the Highgate vampire incidents began. More chillingly, on the night of Halloween 1968, an act of desecration was followed in nearby Tottenham Park Cemetery. Flowers had been taken from graves and arranged in circles with arrows pointing to a new grave which was uncovered. A stake had been driven through the coffin lid and into the heart of the corpse. As interest in the Highgate vampire mounted, a rivalry grew up between David Farrant and Sean Manchester, with each belittling the other's skills as an exorcist, and each stating that he would be the one to expel the spectre lurking in Highgate.
I bet these were really cool looking people. Definitely didn't wear flasher max.
I got a picture of, I'll post it, Farron. He looks like...
Can I guess before you tell me?
On, yeah.
Thick rimmed glasses.
He
thick
looks like
moustache.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Poe?
Like Edgar Allan Poe.
Okay.
That's it. I was going to say Edward Allan Poe. Yeah, Edgar.
Like fringe goatee, gaunt face.
Yeah.
Flasher mac.
Yeah, and like because it is the 50s, he is like in an old style suit with a hat and
That's cool.
yeah. On the evening of Friday 13th March 1970, a programme aired on ITV featuring Farron, Manchester and the others claiming to have seen supernatural figures around Highgate. As Friday 13th is an ominous day according to British superstition, this date is often chosen to broadcast programmes dealing with the occult. The programme even included live outside reporting from the Highgate Cemetery. Within 2 hours of the programme being shown, hundreds of would-be vampire hunters began arriving in Highgate. They surged over the locked gates and walls of the necropolis despite the efforts of police officers to stop them. The vampire hunters, many armed with weapons, searched frantically among the Victorian tombs. Those interviews at the scene appeared to genuinely believe in the vampire, saying they were determined to find the monster and put an end to its diabolical actions. The mob caught no vampires that night, though. Some insisted they'd seen a glimpse of the tall, dark figure. The anxiety and terror certainly seemed real. Manchester would later say the Highgate vampire provoked panic and fear and disbelief on a scale which one might anticipate if an alien had landed from outer space. The collective imagination had no defence against what we have unearthed back in the late 60s in Highgate. Farron, meanwhile, still unconvinced the spooky presence was a hoax, complained the media hysteria and local superstition had turned the Highgate entity into a vampire. On that Friday the 13th, as the amateur vampire hunters swarmed over the cemetery, Manchester and some companions made their way to the entrance of one particular catacomb. Manchester had previously been led there by a sleepwalking girl. Weird.
Yeah. If you're the parents of a young girl, be like, yeah, you can follow my young girl whose defence is...
It was the 50s.
Defence, yeah. Well.
Anyway, so the sleepwalking girl, who claimed to have been bothered by the Highgate vampire and had been exhibiting symptoms similar to Elizabeth. Unable to open the door, the group used a rope to climb down into the catacomb through a window. They found themselves in a vault with several coffins, one of which, a sinister-looking casket made of nearly black wood, didn't seem to fit. Manchester and his companions performed an exorcism with holy water and garlic and sprinkled salt all around. A few months later, on Lammas Day, which is the 1st of August, the charred, decapitated remains of a woman were found near the catacombs. The police suspected the mutilated corpse to have been used in a black magic ritual. After this, both Farron and Manchester seemed to become more active. Farron was apprehended by the police in the churchyard next to the cemetery one night, clutching a crucifix and a wooden stake. Farron was arrested, but the case against him collapsed when it came to court.
So the vampire hunters become the hunted themselves.
Yeah.
It's a great cover, though, isn't it?
I can't really work out like what they're doing. Like now they're just going to deface dead bodies and then in the morning be like, look what the vampire did.
They're just that desperate to be for the renown, the fame.
Most of them are LARPing, aren't they? They're just doing things they've read in books.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And it is interesting that it's like literally 1 year after the film came out that was shot in Highgate Cemetery.
This is why we need to watch nerds. Watch nerds carefully. Because you just don't know what they're going to do.
Dangerous group.
One day they will just snap and start beheading people.
These are like vampire incels. They're like, no vampires will come back to life for me. Manchester and his followers, meanwhile, were led to a different family vault by a female psychic helper. After forcing open the doors, they found a black coffin similar to the one they'd seen in the catacombs. Manchester, suspecting it had been moved by a black magic devotees, levered open the lid. It was only when we discovered in the putrid chamber of that tomb in August 1970 what we did and looked upon the horrific countenance of what was inside. Manchester said that we had absolute confirmation of what we were dealing with. Manchester wanted to drive a stake through the body, but a member of his entourage persuaded him not to, as interfering with remains was a crime in England. Still is, not just was.
Well, don't let that stop him.
You've come so far. Instead, the group performed a ritual. They'd used seven crucifixes, 4 white candles, and 7 cups of holy water in a ceremony carried out by 4 men and 1 woman to banish the spirit of evil or evil presence using the Latin formula. News of the spoken exorcism did indeed bring a sigh of relief to the many living in the area. Manchester says the cemetery officials then bricked up the vault with a crucifix and holy water left inside. But Manchester reflected, the vault didn't remain bricked up for long.
You know, the worst thing, if this happened nowadays, right, this would be live streamed on Instagram. This would be hashtagged fucking, I don't know.
Hashtag old lady Kale.
Yeah. And like, people would follow this.
I would.
Yeah, because you're fucking weird. Why were people so stupid back then? We've not changed at all.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's not back then, is it? They're not like a one-off.
We're injecting bleach.
We've just not changed.
Evolution has come to a halt. Farrant and his group were also making efforts to deal with the strange presence. They decided to try to communicate with the entity and discover its purpose. In Highgate Cemetery, they conducted rituals using 2 circles, incense, candles, and a medium. Can't get anywhere without the medium. The first time they tried this, the press interrupted them. A year later, according to Farrant, another attempt saw the entity clasping the medium by the throat. We had to break the circle. The area turned cold. She felt she was being enveloped by blackness. She felt something was trying to strangle her. Farrant was now convinced the entity was malignant. After hearing of incidents to which a sinister force had pushed people over in Swains Lane, he did more research. Farrant came up with a theory that the being wasn't a vampire at all, but an evil presence that travelled along a ley line. This ley line began at the Columbarium, a part of the cemetery where urns are kept, and ran across Highgate through 2 old public houses, Highgate Wood and a block of flats built over a nunnery. Farrant claimed he found evidence of disturbing supernatural activity in all of these places. Some people he spoke to said they'd glimpsed a tall, dark figure. A manager in one of the pubs apparently saw a sight so horrific it turned his hair white, and one of the flats built over the nunnery had to be exorcised. Despite the ceremony that Manchester and his colleagues conducted in the tomb, any relief was short-lived. Manchester said strange occurrences failed to cease and more horrifying incidents ended any hope that we'd quieted the disturbance with a mere spoken exorcism rite. Further vampiric outages were to follow. About 3 years later, Manchester claims he and his associates discovered the same ominous black casket in the cellars of an abandoned and suitably Gothic mansion on the borders of Highgate and Crouch End. Manchester suspected the coffin had been moved there to avoid all the attention the media and enthusiastic vampire hunters had forced on Highgate Cemetery.
Why have these people not been stopped? There should be a squad following this man.
Manchester's group dragged the coffin out of the basement, up the stairs and into the grounds of the mansion. Manchester said dawn was about to break, starting to send spears of bright illumination onto the macabre spectacle below. When the lid was removed, we beheld the same thing we'd seen in August 1970. This was now the early part of 1974. Our quarry this time looked even more exaggerated, even more distorted than I remembered it. Far worse than even that time in the Highgate vault. Its burning, fierce eyes under the many furrowed brows were staring, yellow at the edges with blood-red centres. Unlike anything imaginable, the mouth was set in a cruel expression, the lips drawn back. Manchester drove a stake into the Highgate vampire. With a mighty blow, he sharpened a shaft of wood, impaled the creature's heart. We witnessed the bloody shell cave in and quickly turn filthy brown.
So, sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
Is this just straight up fan fiction at this point? Otherwise, what did he stab?
I reckon... Oh, what did he stab? Well, he stabbed a corpse. Let me finish, then we'll have your theory. All right?
Okay. I think we both know what my theory is.
That itself soon became a sluggish flow of inhumane slime in the bottom of the casket. It's a nice...
I'm thinking of the slime from Goosebumps.
Oh, okay.
Do you ever watch that episode?
Yeah.
With and there was one where the slime was on a plane.
On a plane.
Do you know slime on a plane?
As Manchester believed that cremation is recommended as the ultimate deterrent and prevention to the vampire's nightly wanderings, he and his followers then burned the coffin and what was left of the body. This took several hours, after which all that remained was a great scorch mark and some bones that needed to be ground down and cast to the four corners of four winds of the earth. Following the exhaustive process, Manchester pronounced that the Highgate Cemetery is purged. We're not finished. Well, we are, but we're not. Manchester claims to have destroyed the Highgate vampire, did little to end the feud between him and Farrant. There had even been rumours that the two would meet in a magician's duel.
I reckon they secretly loved each other.
Maybe.
You know, like how you act mean to like the one that you really fancy.
It's like quite primary school, isn't it? Yeah, like you punch someone.
I reckon when this all come to an end, they met up in the graveyard and just consummated their weird love in a tomb.
The two would meet in a magician's duel on Parliament Hill on Friday the 13th. April 1973.
Is that where they clash their wands together?
No, I imagine. Have you seen the episode of South Park when Cartman's psychic and he's like, and then the other psychic, I reckon it's that.
I thought they just touched their wands together and then.
Oh. No, that happens later.
Oh yeah, that's in the tomb later.
Yes, so they meet for a magician's duel on Parliament Hill on Friday the 13th of April 1973. However, this never happened.
Oh, what?
I know, let down. In 1974, Farrant was jailed after being convicted of interfering with remains and vandalising memorials in Highgate Cemetery.
How long did that take?
But I know you're saying it's fiction, but he did actually dig up bodies.
No, I believe that, but...
The scene of him driving a stake into a corpse and it just turned into sludge.
And it getting Thanos and then...
Yeah. But that would just happen with a decompile. Like, if you moved it, it would probably do that anyway, wouldn't it?
I was thinking that when you were reading it, like, did this guy actually fucking do that?
Well, he got arrested for it, so...
That is mental.
Right, we're not finished. Farrant asserted that the damage had been caused by Satanists rather than him, but both Farrant's imprisonment and the rumoured duel served to keep the Highgate vampire in the public mind for several years. The quarrel between Farrant and Manchester dragged on for decades, with each claiming to be an expert exorcist while dismissing the other's abilities. Both spent many years investigating paranormal phenomena, and both produced books, articles and websites, and gave many interviews about the Highgate vampire. These two men and their followers frequently sparred on social media. Darren Farrant died, aged 73, in April 2019, but Manchester, listen to this, Manchester still works as an exorcist and bishop in the British Old Catholic Church, a conservative sect that broke away from the Roman Catholicism. After slaying the Highgate vampire, Manchester maintains he has destroyed dozens of bloodsuckers. One of these incidents apparently involved a secondary contagion from the Highgate vampire in Finchley's Great Northern London Cemetery in 1982. A bite from that infamous vampire had corrupted the body of a woman called Louisa. Arriving at the cemetery, Manchester saw a spider-like creature about the size of a cat. He staked it and felt for sure he'd put an end to the pollution of the Highgate vampire for good.
So he just killed a cat as well?
Yep. But he's protected by the Catholic Church now, so do what you want.
Well, they do a bit worse than killing cats, but
yeah, exactly.
We'll skip over that again.
But has the Highgate vampire, or whatever it was, really been laid to rest? Farrant thought not, and ominously, a number of sightings of tall, dark figures with burning eyes have occurred from the 1990s until the present day. One witness who claimed to have glimpsed the spook in 1991 said he was very tall, well over 6 feet in height and very thin. He wore a long black cape-like cloak and a top hat. His dress looked Victorian in style and he appeared all in black. He also appeared to glide and there was no sound. The ground was littered with leaves, yet I heard no sound from him.
We spoke about this earlier before we started recording. That could just be one of these tour guides that goes around London, wearing a Victorian garb. And he saw that in night and be like, oh, Jesus Christ. But it was just a failed drama graduate.
I like the story. I know it's disgusting that he's actually doing that. But I like it because it makes me go, obviously, logically, vampires aren't real, but they are in the sense of people act out those behaviours.
Yeah.
So, there's the vampire of Bucharest, and that was a guy that he murdered a lot of people.
Yeah.
And he did it because he believed he had to drink their blood. There's obviously Thingy Chase.
Richard Chase.
Yeah, Richard Chase. So then I'm like, you can't technically just say they're not real because those people are vampires, like in their own world, they're vampires and they go out and they, you know, demonstrate vampire behaviour. And the same as vampire hunters and people that perform these exorcisms, they're not really performing exorcisms, are they? They're not curing vampiric whatever, but they are also real because they're going out and doing it.
Do you think?
So it's, yeah.
Do you think on their deathbed, or at least the one that died, he laid there and thought, what have I done with my life?
I hope.
What have I achieved?
And thought, I really hope someone doesn't stick a stake through my corpse. Is what I hope. He laid there thinking.
The other guy at the Manchester turns up and he just like the last thing he sees like, here you fucking go.
Can you imagine? He's just like, I was the true vampire.
Because he would be his 13th as well. He said he did like 12 vampires.
Yeah. I love that it like got to social media battle stage as well because I really like to picture. I will try and research. I did earlier to see if I could find like a screenshot of, you know, like their Twitter accounts or something, but I couldn't because can you imagine like just scrolling through like your feed and just seeing like, we all know that I really got rid of the Highgate vampire. Like some old man replying like, no, you drove the stake through the toe. I put it through the heart. Like. I want to read that.
It's so good. That's the best part of that story. Two arseholes interfered with corpses and it started a lifelong feud. Neither of them ever came across a real vampire. I love it. It's perfect.
It's good. I like the stories. And I love the Gorbal vampire story because I just love the idea of loads of kids just descending onto this graveyard, not listening to any adults, having no reason or rhyme for what they're doing and just being like, right, nobody is paying attention, kill them.
But it is interesting over the course of like 20, 30 years in Britain, there was like a great vampire panic.
Yeah. I guess that maybe that was our satanic panic.
Yeah,
being
the vampire panic.
Because it all relates back to, obviously, they're saying it's all about Satanists and things. Maybe that was our, you know, we didn't have the Memphis Free, but we had Highgate Cemetery.
Oh, fuck. We had the great vampire flap with the...
Vampire flap. Oh. But yeah, that's my story.
That was really interesting.
Thanks.
It was quite fun,
I
apart
know
from
the
all
last
the
one
desecration.
goes on a bit, but I kept reading it and I was like, I can't really leave that bit out. No, I can't really leave that bit. Like, it's all needed.
Yeah. It's before Sarah goes to me, goes, this is going to be a fun one. I had no idea what it was about. And then, it was like, the first half was fun. The second half was just these two absolute pricks just desecrating people's loved ones. And then possibly each other. Like
you say, we still haven't evolved. Because it is the same
we still
But
do the same.
you'll see old men on Facebook arguing and they'll still be like, your wife was a prick. And it's like the same thing. Like, they might not be digging the bodies up, but they'll still slag each other off on Facebook.
Well, it's like
ruin lives.
Wearing masks or getting vaccinated.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
This is a story about toxic masculinity.
Yeah, it is. It hugely is.
So much by their ego that they desecrate corpses.
It hugely is, and I think it's interesting that they say it straight after Aleister Crowley because he paved the way for that, you know? Yeah. He paved the way for... There's certain behaviours that a man can display that will bring you power, and it's not the right way to get your power, but it will work. Yeah. So, yeah.
And he liked a nice steak, didn't he?
Yeah. You've been sitting on that for a while, haven't you?
I think we call it there.
Yeah, should we call that? Anyway, if you enjoyed the episode and want to give us a nice rating.
We've had some nice iTunes reviews from some lovely listeners.
We have. So please give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or 5-star us on Spotify.
If you can.
Yeah, that'd be nice. You can follow us on Instagram at Highly Strange Pod. You can find us on Facebook with the Highly Strange Podcast.
Yeah.
And you can email us, especially email us if you've heard any of these kind of stories. But because like these could have been your grandparents, not the two men. I'm not implying that anybody's related to them, but you might have like a grandparent that was caught up in the hysteria, and that's really cool. Yeah, so, give us an email if you know anyone that. was a part of it. What's that? highlystrangepod@gmail.com.
If you've been desecrated by a man in a flasher coat.
No, ring the police if that happened to you, not highly strange. We can't help you.
And share us around.
Yeah, and look out for now on a Wednesday, we will give you a little teaser. Hopefully easier to work out than Paul Rudd. But you'll get a teaser for what each episode's going to be.
We've actually got our shit together, so we actually know what's coming up now.
Yeah,
we're not scrambling every week to think of something.
We're planned, we're sorted. And that's that.
That's that.
Have a lovely week.
Share us with who do we want the listeners to share us to?
Scottish children.
Share us to Scottish children.
Maybe find Manchester. He's the one that's still alive, isn't it? Farrant's dead.
Share us with the city of Manchester. with your local Mancunian friends.
Have a good week. Bye.
Bye.